Greetings, everyone. Wonderful to be here today with you all, and I appreciate everyone who came in person and everyone online. Welcome to this meeting about Rockaway Beach's Source Water Protection Plan. We'll be focused on discussing the draft plan that has been developed. So I'll start with introducing myself. I'm Suzanne DeCirca with GSI Water Solutions, and I'm part of the team that's been facilitating this whole process. Our other team member is online with us today. Michaela, do you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone. I'm not sure if you can see me, but I'm Michaela. I've been helping develop the Source Water Protection Plan, and I'm happy to be here and excited to hear from all of you.
And Michaela, can you advance to the next slide? Okay, so my contact information is there. If you have any comments or questions after the meeting, and certainly during this meeting, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions and provide comments. And we just ask that in-person attendees silence their cell phones to avoid distractions, and that online attendees mute themselves and keep the video off during the presentation. When there is the Q&A time, that is an opportunity for you to ask your question and unmute if you'd like, or use chat. So the meeting will be recorded and it will be posted on the city's website after the meeting. Oh, Michaela. So the agenda today is first public comment, and then we'll provide an overview of the Source Water Protection Plan, which will include discussing the background, the risk assessment section, strategies to address the risks, the implementation plan, contingency plan, and future water sources. And then we'll end with the Q&A. So with that, we'll go into the, there we go. Yeah. Well, and before we get into the public comment, just as a reminder, this whole plan is really aimed at protecting the city's primary drinking water source, and that's Jetty Creek. The city does have groundwater as a source, but the focus of this plan is really Jetty Creek and that watershed. And there are other processes going on in the city to focus on the groundwater. So with that, I think we can jump on in to the public comments.
All right, I'll take that. The public comment period is an essential part of local government meetings and policy development. Each person has 4 minutes to speak. This portion of the meeting is a time for us to listen to you. We will have an opportunity at the end of the meeting for questions. The electronic egg will count down, giving speakers a 1-minute warning by turning yellow. I have the sign-up sheet. Anyone joining us remotely who wishes to provide comment can notify the city recorder now by clicking the raise hand icon, and we'll add you to the sign-up sheet. Do we have anyone watching remotely for public comment?
No, we have to raise.
All right. I have Nancy Lanyon. Could you please approach the podium?
That there's going to be question and answer, but I do want to say Nancy Lanyon, 621 South Anchor Street in Rockaway Beach. Absolutely, all of the work that y'all have done and city staff has done is just beyond belief. And I cannot thank you. The resource packet that you put together addressed so many things, and especially for a small town like City of Rockaway Beach, for the funding resources, for guidelines, for so many things. And I just don't know how to say thank you enough, really, for all of that. You had so many good ideas in there, water conservation measure. We need, like Multnomah County, Clackamas County, a toilet detection kit. It's that tablet to see if our toilets are leaking. Can't get one from there because it's only by district. So hopefully we can do that. For investment possibilities, such as carbon offset and money partners. I'm hoping that our new wonderful finance officer, and I'm sorry, I can't remember her name, can be apprised of that and help us out as a small town. There's was 4.3.6 talking about sponsorships, and I'm thinking adopt a trail like we have adopt, certain parts of the highway or roads. Hopefully we'll be addressing someday parking at the bottom of Jetty Water Creek, but I guess that's a long way off. The environmental education grants, hopefully we can work very closely with TVCC Community College for creating an associate degree program, possibly for stewardship of Jetty Water Creek and strategies. Gosh. When we do reevaluation for stream classifications, we absolutely have to make sure that we're doing it at the right times of year, because throughout many documentations in like Tillamook County and watershed, they're only done at a time of year sometimes that don't have any relevance to fish habitat and water flow. So we have to make sure we're on it when we get this next step now of evaluation. And in phase 2, it said neighbors. And I was just wondering who our neighbors were when it comes to our watershed outside of the 2 owners, because I know they exist east. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. And that concludes the public comment period.
Okay, well, great, thank you. So we'll move now into the main part of our presentation. So we'll start just by refreshing everyone around Jetty Creek watershed and what that looks like. So we have a visual right here, which is also in the plan, that shows the extent of the watershed. And it also shows the groundwater and the area that the groundwater can draw from. So that kind of orients us to the primary water source and what we'll be talking about today, for work that could be done to protect that source water area. So for a little bit of background about this whole development process, there was an update to DEQ's source water assessment that came out in 2016, and that provided an update on different potential risks to the watershed. It identified that, and in the appendices of the draft plan that was sent out, it has that full assessment, so you can take a look and see what that looks like. And that provided some information to the city, something to consider. And then the city pursued a drinking water source protection fund grant through the Oregon Health Authority, and was successful in securing that grant to develop this drinking water protection plan. The plan process involved not just writing the plan, but making sure that there was a lot of community involvement. So first, the city set up an advisory committee called the Source Water Protection Plan Development Advisory Committee. Also, the city set up a source water protection plan team and then solicited public input. And I'll go into those each next. So the source water protection plan team consisted of local stakeholders and also technical experts. It ranged from the landowners to different agencies to non-governmental organizations, folks who could bring in technical knowledge and understanding of the Jetty Creek watershed. This group helped guide development of the plan and were with us through each stage of development. The city also, as I mentioned, set up the Source Water Protection Plan Development Advisory Committee, and this was established by City Council to provide reviews and community input throughout the process as well. So this group met regularly during the process and provided comments. As far as what is in a plan, these are the major components. The first is risks. So there's a whole section around risk identification and prioritization. The group looked at, and I'll go into a bit more detail about that in a minute, but The group had a variety of resources to draw from and technical knowledge and local input, and helped to use that to identify what the full suite of risks it considered to be were, and then also to think about how to prioritize those. The next section in the plan is strategies. So how could the city address those risks? What would be the different approaches for that? Next is implementation. So there's one section dedicated to how implementing those strategies could happen and in what kind of phasing could that occur. And then towards the end of the plan, there's a contingency plan section. And this really goes into what the city would do in the event of a loss of its water supply. And then there's a consideration of potential future water sources. And we'll go into all that in more detail next. So as far as what the timeline was, we began in the summer of 2024, focusing first on the risk assessment. We had a town hall in September where we had an opportunity to get some feedback from the public. In fall, we really focused on developing strategies based on the risks that were identified and prioritized, as well as then looking at the implementation plan. Over the winter, we have been diving in and just writing the actual plan itself in preparation for this meeting today, and then the next steps, which include updating the plan based on comments, and then giving City Council an opportunity to look at it, followed by submitting it to the Oregon Health Authority and Department of Environmental Quality, which will review it, and then we will seek approval of the plan. So we'll start with the risk assessment process. And we had a whole meeting dedicated to this back in September. So this will be just a very concise version of that. But just for some background, again, we looked at the source water assessment update that was completed in 2016. We gathered knowledge from the team, as well as from the advisory committee and the public, and integrated that information into our consideration of risks. And also, once we had those risks identified, we tried to group them to help with kind of organizing and thinking about how to approach them. So those are categorized by land uses or activities or the source of that risk. A part of the whole risk assessment process is thinking about the prioritization. And the goal of the prioritization is really to help the city think about how to allocate its resources over the coming years to try to address those risks. So thinking about, the ones that seem like they're higher risk or maybe more of a driver for resources than other things that may be not as large a concern. So we used this matrix that you see here to guide that prioritization process. And it involved looking at both the likelihood of the risk and the impact of the risk, using a scale of 1 to 5 for each. 1 being rare or unlikely for likelihood, and for impact, insignificant, versus for impact on a 5, it would be catastrophic. And for likelihood, it would be almost certain. So you'll see here that then using that numbering system, we could come up with what would be low. So ones that kind of scored low in both categories ended up in the green. Ones that were kind of moderate in the scale of 1 to 5 ended up in the yellow, so medium. And then the ones that were both high, that would end up in the red. And again, that's to guide the strategies and how those are implemented. So now I'm going to give Michaela a chance to talk a little bit about what those risks were and the prioritization, just as a review.
All right, so some of the categories that the risks were grouped into were natural hazards, forestry, and then municipal. Natural hazards, there's quite a few, but the ones that rank highest in priority are climate change and drought and low flows, followed by highly erodible soils. So drought, droughts and low flows and climate change are all a concern because of the potential impacts on water supply availability. And then highly erodible soils contribute to turbidity in the stream, which is a challenge for the treatment plant. And so those are all things that need to be addressed. And then there are some other ones that were identified, like tsunamis and earthquakes, and then wildfires, severe storms, and volcanic ashfall. Those can all have various effects, and some of them are overlapping in different ways. And then the forestry category, all of these risks are forest management activities contributing potentially harmful effects to the stream. And so these ones were clear-cut harvesting and pesticides and herbicides, and those ranked the highest. And then after that, riparian impacts. So activities in the riparian buffer zone that could potentially contribute contaminants or erosion to the stream. And then forestry access roads that can also contribute potential sediments. And then there are a couple of borrow pits, which are, I understand, the same thing as gravel quarries, which are used to maintain some of the access roads, and those pose one of the more minor threats. And then there's this municipal category where vandalism, so any intentional harm to parts of the water system, whether that's in the drinking water source watershed or to infrastructure, that's ranked as a medium risk. And then the other categories are land use and demands on water supply that are outside of the watershed. So land use focuses on activities in the watershed that could have harmful effects. So unauthorized camping and recreation are some examples of things that could contribute contaminants to the water source. And then for demands on the water supply outside of the watershed, development and tourism are some really important risks to consider to the water supply, sort of like a water quantity standpoint as opposed to quality, which we'll talk about later, can be addressed through conservation and planning and things like that.
Great. So then when we looked at all these risks, we started talking about what kind of strategies could we have for each of those risks. And as we were discussing that, we could see that there was a certain overlap in strategies among the different risks. And what we did is we basically identified some themes based on the strategies for each of the risks. And these are the themes that came out. So they are critical area protection, data collection and monitoring programs, watershed restoration, sediment and erosion control, water supply and emergency planning, communications and public engagement, and water conservation. And you'll see in the plan that we have a table in there with little dots kind of indicating how for the different risks, addressing those risks can fall into a number of these different categories. So, by doing one thing, you could potentially help with a couple of issues in the watershed. So we'll go through each of these strategies now. So the first strategy is critical area protection. And when we say critical area, what we're talking about is areas of the watershed where there are conditions that could have a outsized impact on water quality or quantity. So it could be some steep slopes or particularly highly erodible soil areas where addressing or protecting those areas could have an outsized benefit for the watershed. And when we think about ways to protect the area, a very common way to do so is through land acquisition and conservation easements. So land acquisition being the purchase of the land. And then conservation easements would be an agreement where a portion of the land would be set aside to help protect the water quality or quantity. And one of the benefits of this particular path is that it could enable management of the watershed for drinking water quality and quantity versus other land use goals that may exist. Another strategy is data collection and monitoring programs. So there are a number of risks where it would be beneficial to gather more information, to gather the historical data that's out there about water quality or flows, and get an understanding of what the status of those have been over time. And then thinking about also what kind of ongoing testing there is happening, making sure that that continues. So the water treatment plant has testing that goes on that are routine, and that includes turbidity. And then there's water quantity testing as well. Another strategy is watershed restoration. So some of the benefits of that would be enhancing water retention in the watershed, because by helping retain water throughout the year, that can help contribute to flows in the summertime when that need is most critical because there's less rainfall and demands increase in summertime. So a couple of strategies to enhance water retention could include developing some kind of natural or built storage in the watershed. And natural meaning kind of using what's there and helping support it. It could be wetlands. Another type of built storage would be some type of infrastructure to help just with the slower release of water from the watershed. And then there's also beaver habitat. Beavers do a lot to help retain water in the area by building their dams. They can keep the water in the watershed a little longer. And that could infiltrate into the soils and ground, as well as just store it on the surface. Another is enhancing water quality. So there are a number of ways that that could be done through restoration. One would be through riparian buffers. So doing more plantings in the riparian zone and other measures to help improve that area. And that could include invasive plant removal in that riparian area or even uplands. Another strategy is large woody debris, because that can also help slow water and help more of it kind of stay in the watershed a little longer. Another strategy is sediment and erosion control. So there is high turbidity that can occur during parts of the year in the Jetty Creek watershed, and targeting projects around certain areas like with steep slopes or areas with highly erodible soils, maybe where there's a higher landslide potential. Doing projects in that area could assist with reducing the potential for turbidity. Roads and culverts can also be a source of turbidity because of either, rainfall leading to some debris coming off of, or sediments coming off of the roads or culverts, some of the water kind of, as you see here, coming down with more force in a particular area and adding sediment. So addressing those issues can help reduce the sediment and erosion. And then other projects like riparian planting, adding to that buffer and to that vegetative cover, and the root systems are helpful, as well as working with landowners being a big component of getting any of this done. So we wanted to make sure to call that out. And Michaela will go through a few more.
So the next category of strategies that the city developed are water supply and emergency planning. So in addition to doing projects in the watershed, like restoration, protecting the water supply that the city has already, and planning for the future, and even possible backup water sources to sustain the source that we have, is part of it. So that could include updating the existing plans the city has. They have an emergency operations plan, which incorporating more source water protection into those emergency plans would give the city a long-term strategy that they can implement when an emergency or if an emergency occurs. And then some of the water supply plans that the city updates are its water master plan, which talks a lot about infrastructure needs and things that will be updated. And then the water management and conservation plan. And that deals a lot with specifically conserving sources and looking at water rights and things like that. Disaster and climate change preparedness are part of this strategy. So all of those natural hazards that we talked about in the risk category, preparing for those in these plans. And that could also include doing some public outreach to make sure the community is prepared. And then this strategy also addresses those risks from tourism and development, and it makes sure that the city has enough supply to meet its demand in the future. And that'll also look at what infrastructure is needed to meet those demands. And then another category that was formed was communications and public engagement. This ended up being its own category just because it's so important to protecting the water source. So there are kind of different scenarios that could play out where some of the watershed or the watershed is acquired, or maybe some parts of it won't be acquired. So in either situation, making sure that there's maintained communication with the landowners and any partners that are working with the city on projects, that's going to be super important for exchanging data and information, planning, talking about management strategies, and then, of course, communicating with the public and keeping the community informed. And the city also has the Jetty Creek Working Group, which consists of the landowners and some partners. And so maintaining that is part of this strategy. And lastly, there are water conservation measures as a strategy, similar to the water supply planning. Just making sure that the water source that exists is conserved and water is used efficiently as a way to protect it. So spreading awareness about water conservation and encouraging the community to use water efficiently through social media and other platforms like that. And then developing and implementing ordinances that would limit water use for construction or put standards into place for water efficiency. And then the infrastructure category where water can be conserved within the system by making sure leaks are detected and fixed, and just maintaining and upgrading infrastructure.
So then the next step after thinking about all these strategies is how are we going to implement them? Because it's good to have some approach in place, kind of a guide for what could be done next. So what we did is we considered how that could look. And we, as a group, decided to go with a phased approach. So we thought about it as like phase one being projects that are either really high priority because of the risk level associated with them. Those could be in phase one, the most immediate phase. It could also be certain things that would help get a process going. So it could be the first step in a multi-step process. Or things that maybe the city's already doing, and so it could keep rolling on that or expanding upon that. Things like data collection, establishing partnerships would fall into that phase one as well. Phase two, like I mentioned, it could be the next step in a process or something that maybe was not at the highest priority, but still a priority. Those could fall into phase two. Strengthening partnerships would also be part of that phase, and securing funding for partnerships and projects that were developed in phase one. Another phase for phase three, that could look like those, either the lower priority activities could move into that phase, or it could be the later phase in some kind of activity. So we're going to go through and give you just a rundown on what the activities that are listed under each phase for each of those strategies. So for the critical area protection strategy in phase 1, that could involve planning for acquisition or easements. The city has already been working in this area in recent times, so there's already some momentum happening there. And then another activity could be developing a broad forest stewardship plan. So one that could be applied to the watershed depending on kind of what happens down the road with any kind of acquisition. And this is also in the works. There has been funding that the city has received to support this effort. Another activity then is also communication with the landowners and partners about different management strategies. For data collection and monitoring, for phase 1, that could be inventorying the existing data, what is there, and what kind of monitoring efforts are in place. So data needs could then be prioritized based on what information is there. And then developing more detailed information about risks in critical areas, if that's needed, as well as partnering with different organizations for technical assistance to help with any of the monitoring efforts that seem to become high priority. For watershed restoration, it would be working with landowners and different organizations to think about what are some high priority projects in the watershed? What are the conditions? Where are there opportunities? Having those conversations and getting the ball rolling on projects. And then coming out of that, what kind of partnerships could occur to help projects get going? For sediment and erosion control, activities could include identifying the high priority areas, the ones that we talked about, like areas where there's a lot of erosion or culverts, for instance, and then working towards pursuing those projects. Also conducting studies as needed to gather more information that could help inform decision-making, and looking into technical assistance to help with different kinds of assessments or projects, and communicating with landowners as well around the conditions out there and potential projects. For water supply and emergency planning, phase 1 would look like updating supply plans and incorporating source water protection in emergency plans. It would include assessing future needs and exploring different alternative sources. And we'll go into that in a little bit more too. And there is a section focused on that in the plan. And then identifying partnerships, again, there's a theme. For community or communications and public engagement, activities would include maintaining communications with landowners and partners to be able to be up to speed with what's happening in the watershed, and then also what other partners are doing and what kind of resources they could possibly bring or what funding is coming up and available. Another would be to enroll in the Forest Activity Electronic Reporting and Notification System. And what this system is one that enables you to be notified if there are any particular forestry activities that are going to occur in the watershed that need to be registered with the Oregon Department of Forestry. And then communicating source water protection efforts to the public. That's also a big part of it. So the public understands the value of the watershed and then the types of things that the city is doing to help protect the water supply. Okay, phase 2, Michaela? Oh, did I miss one? Oh, okay, we missed one. Phase 1, yes, water conservation measures. So that would be continuing efforts to reduce water loss. The city is working on that and has been. And it would just be continuing that, looking for ways to conserve water through that means. And then also water conservation messaging to the public, because there's, we can all do something to help with that effort. Also exploring funding for additional conservation measures, and then identifying partners or resources to support different efforts that the city is interested in implementing.
Okay, I can go into phase two now. Sorry about that. So phase two of the critical area protection strategies, completing a land acquisition, that could include several steps like due diligences, appraisals, mapping. But the idea is that phase two is when that would be completed. And if a land acquisition was completed for only part of the watershed, the other strategies for critical area protection would still apply, working with the current landowners or future landowners. And then in this phase, the city would refine the forest stewardship plan that was developed in phase one, and it would be refined to apply to the specific lands that have been acquired. So just the specific components and risks of that land would be detailed in that plan, and the city would start implementing it. And then, of course, continue community engagement efforts about the critical area protection, about specifically the land acquisition projects. And then for data collection and monitoring, that would look like just continuing to do the existing monitoring efforts, which include the turbidity measurements that the city does at the treatment plant, testing for certain water quality parameters, and any other water or any other monitoring activities identified in phase one. And then applying for funding and implementing any new monitoring programs if resources allow, for the higher priority risks, which might include the water, the climate change and the water supply kinds of risks. And then in this phase, the city could look at evaluating its other surface water rights as a potential source of supply. But this wasn't as much of a priority, and that's why it's in phase two. And then the other strategies for phase two, watershed restoration. The city would continue planning and implementing the restoration projects it had been doing in phase one, continue working with partners and assessing needs in the watershed for other projects. Things like the storage capacity improvements and riparian planting. And then, of course, pursuing funding for and implementing new projects as needed, which is a theme throughout all of these. And then sediment and erosion control, same thing, pursuing funding for and implementing high priority projects, which maybe that would be culvert replacements, road improvements, anything that was identified in phase one. And then building on or creating road maintenance plans for acquired lands. The forest landowners are required to do forest road inventory and assessments. And so this could be building on those plans or creating the city's plan if it acquires the watershed. And then in this phase, the city could look at coordinating with the neighboring landowners and investigate who those landowners are and if there are any collaborations that could happen. And then water supply and emergency planning for phase two. The Public Works Department would continue implementing infrastructure projects and identifying new opportunities for infrastructure improvement. And then a transportation plan for emergency access roads in the watershed could be developed, which would give firefighters and other emergency personnel access to the watershed. And it would assess the roads and everything that already exists and come up with improvements. And then vulnerabilities to vandalism in the watershed could be addressed in this phase. And then communications and public engagement, continuing the source water protection outreach and the communications with the landowners as mentioned previously, and also looking at how recreation in the watershed can be addressed. So that could maybe include forming a partnership with a public and private management. The city could look at that to manage recreation in the watershed. And then communicating with wildfire response planners to address wildfire vulnerabilities and maintaining the ferns, which is again, forest activity, electronic reporting and notification system. And then the conservation measures in phase 2, the city would continue implementing the measures identified in phase 1 and any additional measures. And then continue pursuing partnerships for a potential conservation groups or workshops or any partnerships that could help implement conservation measures. And this is also the phase where the city would look at implementing conservation ordinances to limit inefficient uses of water, which could be also looked at in phase 3. And then phase 3 for all of the strategies looks pretty similar. Just continuing to expand on previous efforts, seeking funding for those efforts, strengthening partnerships, and then tracking and responding to changes in the watershed, and how all of these strategies that are implemented make a difference. And also addressing some of those lower priority risks. For example, the land use in the watershed, like recreation, and then maintaining those existing plans and assessing additional needs. And I'll let Suzanne finish it out.
Right. So on to the contingency plan. This particular part of the plan is very prescriptive. There are a number of different required topics that we are supposed to cover in this section. So, and those are outlined, and we'll go through each of those. The contingency plan is coordinated and based on other plans, the emergency operations plan, and the city's water management and conservation plan. Including this is included in that requirement for state approval, so it needs to be done. And basically the focus of it is what would the city do in the event that water supply becomes dramatically diminished or unavailable. So one of the required topics is discussing the threats to the water supply. And we have a list developed of risks through this process. And there are a number that are directly related to the potential loss of water. So those are included. And then there are natural disasters and human related events that could fall into this category as well. There needs to be in this plan a prioritization of water usage. And so right here, you can see the outline of what that prioritization would be. First would be fire protection, followed by medical facilities, then residential, school and commercial, and parks and irrigation. Another component is response to potential incidents. The emergency action plan lays out an action checklist for what the city would do in an incident. And rather than kind of rehash it all in here, we just largely refer to different portions of that plan and where you can go to find this information. This contingency plan also talks about key personnel and their roles and responsibilities. So we've got listed up here, part of the emergency response team includes the mayor and city council, the city manager and administrative assistant, an emergency manager, city finance and a public informations officer, the fire chief and safety officer, public works director, and emergency response agencies that could support the city as well. The contingency plan talks about the replacement of water supply. So in the short term, what could the city do? The city has a water curtailment plan, and that's located in the water management and conservation plan. It talks about under different stages of curtailment, how would the city respond? What would be the types of actions that it would take? in each of those stages. And in addition, there might be an adjustment in addition to curtailment at some level, there could be some adjustment to the use of sources depending on what the situation is. In the longer term, if it's going to take a lot more effort to address the replacement of water supply, it would be a continuation of some of what's described in that phase one, so likely curtailment or some adjusting in use, and would likely also involve some type of infrastructure work, because that's probably assuming that there's something that's been significantly damaged and needs to be rebuilt in that case. For conservation measures, the Water Management Conservation Plan talks about what could be done in those different curtailment stages. The Water Management Conservation Plan contains a curtailment plan. So it's kind of like a plan within a plan, kind of like how this Drinking Water Protection Plan has a little contingency plan tucked into it. So for each of those stages, there are certain curtailment measures that would be encouraged on a voluntary basis for some of the stages, like stage one, that is kind of, just maybe a small minor issue, versus a stage four, which could be a critical, massive problem with providing water. Those could be mandatory measures, and one's focused on protecting just human life and health. So. The contingency plan also discusses how often the plan will be reviewed and different testing that could occur along the way of the plan. The plan is set to be reviewed at least every 5 years, and it may be reviewed and updated based on changes in the emergency operations plan or due to lessons learned from an actual emergency that has occurred in that 5-year time frame. Next, it goes over personnel training and how folks are getting prepared for emergency response. It talks about public education. So what information is out there? There's some on the website and in outreach materials that go out. And then there's also a public information officer for emergencies to get information to the public. And then the final piece is logistical and financial resources. So what could the city do to get the resources it needs in an emergency? And then the very last section of the plan is called the Future Water Sources section. And the intention behind the requirement to include this section is that they being OHA and DEQ, Oregon Health Authority and Department of Environmental Quality, they wanted communities to think about if they're planning to get a new source within the planning period of the plan, which is a 20-year period, then it would probably be important to also consider risks to that potential future source coming up in the near term, and then what some strategies could be associated with that. In the case of Rockaway Beach, there is no immediate plans for expansion of the water system. Right now, based on what the WMCP, the Water Management and Conservation Plan, showed, is that the water sources seem to be sufficient through most of the planning period. But when we start getting out towards the end, more information and updated information needs to be developed to be able to say, okay, what does the city really need closer to that 15 to 20-year time frame out from now, and how could it meet those needs? So there are several other planning processes that can occur in the coming years to help inform that decision making, and those include kind of updating the water master plan. That's very infrastructure focused and planning for like infrastructure needs related to water. And then there's the Water Management Conservation Plan, and that's thinking about water rights and conservation, and both of those think about demands and water supply. So evaluating, by going through those planning processes, the city will be able to really consider what their future demands are and assess what kind of supply they've got and need. So The other component for consideration, what was included in the 2020 WMCP was a discussion about potential future sources, and those could include water rights that are held in reserve or potential interconnection with neighboring communities like Manzanita and Wheeler or Garibaldi systems. But again, analyses need to occur to understand really what the needs are of the city. So now we've gone through all the major sections of the plan, and we're entering the part of the meeting where we really would like to hear your feedback and any comments that you have. We just ask that well, in this case, that you come to the podium for your questions, or if you're online, that you use your chat function or maybe the raised hand. And just thinking ahead, this will be provided, the video recording will be provided on the website. So that's another opportunity for you to, if you want to go back and hear about what was talked about today. And then also you can share that with other people that may be interested, and let them know that they can also see that and still respond and contact us with any questions or comments. And here's my contact info again. So I think with that, we can open it up to questions. Yes, if you wouldn't mind. And then let's see, just wanted to check, there's that next steps. Yeah, I just want to mention one thing. Michaela, can you really quick go to the next steps, just so we don't lose track of that? And you're fine, yeah. Just one slide. We will be incorporating your feedback into this draft. And then the next steps will be city council approval, and then submitting the final draft of the plan to the Oregon Health Authority and Department of Environmental Quality for approval in the spring. Okay, thank you for your patience.
Mary McGinnis, I'm on city council and I live at 133 South Harbor here in Rockaway. And I don't have a question, I just have a comment. I attended almost all of the Source Water Protection Committee meetings, and I'm so grateful to the work that they did. They were very thoughtful, very detailed, and there's Lydia Hess and Ron and Sandy Johnson. And there's more, but there's some who are attending here today. And I feel comfortable as a city councilor with what's coming to me because of the detailed work that the committee did. So I just want to say thank you to the committee.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments in the room or online?
Terry Wojtowski. And my question is, now you've got it where it will go to the, be approved, go to the DEQ, and then what happens after that? It's approved, then the process starts with trying to purchase the property, or what happens after that?
Yeah, so then the next step would be for the city, it has its plan. The city can start thinking about how to start using that implementation plan and addressing the different strategies. And so it will still have its activities going on with land acquisition and conservation land acquisition, I imagine. And then it's an opportunity for them to start to pursue the other strategies as well. And that might be like starting to look for funding, for instance, or developing partnerships.
So getting the funding established, you've got part of that already, correct?
Yeah, some of the strategies do have funding, like the forest stewardship plan. Yeah, thanks.
I just wondered, do you have any more specifics, or at least bullet points that are part of the water management conservation plan? Is that something that exists, or is that something that's being developed?
Yes, so there is a full water conservation plan from 2020. And is that available online?
It should be. If it's not, we can make that, we'll make that available. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I also do water management conservation planning, develop those plans. And just to give you a sense of what's in them, they talk about the water system, its demands and consumption, its water rights, its infrastructure. It talks about the water conservation activities of the community and sets 5-year benchmarks for activities. So what it plans to do in the next 5 years in various areas of conservation. It has the curtailment plan, and then it talks about the supply looking forward. So what would the community need and how could water rights support that? Any other questions, comments?
Oh, yes. I guess I'll just ask a follow-up. How often is that conservation plan updated?
Every 10 years.
Every 10 years?
Yes, and there's also a progress report due at the 5-year mark, which is much shorter. But at the 10-year mark, yeah, there can be a full reevaluation. So that would happen in 2029 is when it's actually due to the department. Any other questions?
Going once.
I just wanted to say thank you so much to all of you for showing up and, providing input and just following the process. We really would like to thank the Source Water Protection Plan Development Advisory Committee. It's been wonderful to get all your input, and it's been really a great energy and effort put towards the plan. We'd like to thank the team as well, who provided a lot of technical guidance and input along the way. And it's really, it's been great to help you all out on this. So thank you.
I second that. Thank you. It's been great to work with you all.
Okay. Well, thank you all. Great meeting.